Welcome to the Simple Questions podcast. This is your host, Dylan Carnahan. The question for this episode is, what is it like to be a fighter pilot? You will learn in this episode the rigorous training required to become a fighter pilot, insights into the specific combat strategies employed during the first Gulf War, and the unique capabilities of various fighter planes. Our guest served in the United States Air Force for 27 years, achieving the rank of colonel, participated in numerous missions, quantified by 4,500 USAF flying hours, 13 combat sorties, and 169 combat hours during operations such as Southern Watch. Received significant awards and honors during their military career, including a Distinguished Flying Cross for saving a valuable airplane during their first combat sortie, an award from the Association of Old Crows for electronic combat planning of proven force during Desert Storm. I introduce to you Kurt Dittmer. My first introduction, if you will, to aviation was quite some time ago. I was a grade schooler and I had took a trip with my parents to see my uncle out in Colorado. And one of those days that we were out in Colorado, my uncle took me up in a plane and we kind of flew around for a bit. I remember we looked at his house from the plane. And that was kind of my first aviation experience outside of, obviously knowing or flying, being in a plane and flying to a destination like a vacation. So I'm curious, Kurt, what initially drew you to aviation and what were your first experiences?
Well, my dad was a fighter pilot, a three-war veteran. So he actually, as a kind of giving into his background, so he enlisted into basically the aviation cadet program in World War II. So he got selected at the time. He graduated high in his class, but he went to bombers. So he actually went to the B-17, but he walked into the wing commander of the B-17 and said, "Hey, sir, I want to be a fighter pilot." He was 19 years old. So they said, "Lieutenant, I like your spunk, but you're not going to be a fighter pilot." It's 1943 because all the bomber pilots were getting killed. So attrition was 6%. I want to kind of look in the history books. So he said, "But I'm going to do you a favor, Lieutenant." And he ran him through the course twice. So the first time he went through, he was a co-pilot. The second time he went through, he was a 19-year-old aircraft commander. So he took his B-17 over his crew, and the 9 crews that went over with it, this was the only one that came back. So,
Wow.
But while he was there, he couldn't leave. He finished they went from 25 missions to 30. And that was essentially a death knell because those extra 5 missions at 6% attrition is pretty ugly. So his odds were against him, but they made it. So his crew made it. And then he was looking around for something to fly, so he flew fighters. And he was delivering them to the bases because they were bringing them off the boats. And so he ended up walking into a P-51 base and say, "Hey, you need pilots?" And they go, "Yeah, yeah." He goes, "I'm a volunteer." So he's going through training, AWOL, and they're training him, and the bomber command comes, "Hey, what are you doing here?" He says, "I thought you sent me." "No, we didn't send you." "Well, I'm almost done." And they said, "Okay." And so he became a fighter pilot. And he flew P-51 Mustangs. And so he was basically, they had so many combat hours, they gave him, he became a flight lead and was flying for combat. And he got his first kill by diving down from 25,000 feet, rolls out behind an ME-109 and shoots it down. And he went home, landed, and celebrate all that kind of stuff. But that night his chest was hurting and he had collapsed a lung. So they told him he couldn't leave before. Bomber Command told him he couldn't leave because of the invasion. It was super secret. But now they sent him home because he had a collapsed lung. And so anyway, went to Oklahoma and ended up getting back to flying again. So his one lung ended up being better than a normal man's, 2 lungs. And so he got back into flying, was flying P-51s for the National Guard in Oklahoma, and they activated, and they told him, hey, they're looking for volunteers or whatever. They wanted to take him back active duty as a bomber pilot. He said no. So he volunteered and went in as F-51 now. So it was a fighter ground attack. Went to Korea and fought in Korea. And then while he was there, they said, hey, if anybody wants to be a jet pilot, F-86s, you got to go active duty. So he volunteered and went to active duty and flew the F-86. So that was the one that had about a 14-1 or 12-1 kill ratio. So he ends up getting 3 kills. So now he's got 1 Me-109. He's got 3 kills. He's trying to be an ace. But he called my mom and said, hey, if it's stay on my last flight, he actually got 2, shot down 2. And so he wanted to stay. And she said, well, you'll be a bachelor if you do. And my brother was born a year later, and I was born a year after that. So that's how we got introduced to being able and being with my dad. So he took us flying a couple of times as kids, but the best gift you could ever give any kid, we didn't understand it or know at the time, but we're in El Reno, Oklahoma, and this guy, we go out to the airport every so often. We try to get some flights and that type of stuff. So we're out there with my dad, and this guy, he's got a Citabra. So it's an acrobatic paper wood airplane, and he's hitting a headwind. So he's probably doing about 30, 40 knots of ground speed. He lands and he goes, who wants to buy an airplane? My dad goes, how much? He goes, $1,800. He goes, oh, I'll go get the checkbook. So we jump in the car, drive into town, knocks on the door. Hey, Mom, I'm buying an airplane. She goes, oh, how much? $1,800. Okay, gives him the checkbook, and we went out and bought an airplane. So I learned how to fly before I could drive a car.
Wow.
And my brother, so I was 14. My brother was 15. He didn't like it nearly as much as me, but he didn't like the yelling. My dad would, keep your hand on the throttle, and you're going to keep your hand on the throttle. My hands get tired. So he'd do things, and he was kind of teaching you seat of the pants flying. So to me, it was the most fun you could possibly have. There was nothing better other than keep your hand on the throttle. Well, I found out later as you're reading his memoirs that he was shooting a MiG, but he had both hands on the throttle. So the F-86 had 650 caliber machine guns in the nose. So he's hitting it and pieces are coming off, but he's not closing and someone starts shooting at him and bullets come over the cockpit. He reaches down, the throttle had rattled back. So he was in almost idle power. That's why he wasn't gaining on this airplane. That was his 5th kill. So I learned how to fly, and you never took your hand off the throttle. I'm going, great. If I ever get a chance to shoot one down, I won't let the throttle rattle back. So anyway, so that was my dad's. He had war stories out wazoo, and he never told them in front of my mom. But if he was ever with a bunch of other fighter pilots, they'd be telling these stories, and my brother and I would be hiding behind the couch listening because he didn't want us to know all that stuff. But what he did is he said, this is the best gift ever. This is unlogged flying time. Because he wasn't an instructor. He was just letting us fly. He put us in the front seat, and he taught us everything about flying. But when the Air Force first sees you fly, they're going to think you have golden hands.
So Kurt, what a rich history, first off, right? And you're kind of born into that. You're hearing all these stories. You're getting unlogged flying time, right? And you're being indoctrinated, and you enjoy that. You enjoy flying. Can you tell us about your journey to becoming a fighter pilot?
Sure. Yeah. And by the way, if you want to read the stories about my dad, Nancy got a book. Every one of the grandkids and all of my uncles, all the kids across the Dittmer family got a book. It's called Old Tat. Just ask her about that.
Okay.
And you can read it. It's 99 pages. It's a quick read, and TAT stands for Tired Ass Tiger. So one of the things that happens with fighter pilots is they never call you your name. So like my call sign, TAC call sign is tulips. And everybody goes, why tulips? You know, it's not the flower. It's because my brother was lips and had big lips. And then we would fly on the same schedule and they put lips and lips too. You know, I became tulips. That's one of the things about
Yeah.
flying fighters. But so to get to the flying for me, the bottom line is I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. My dad took us early on while we were go from El Reno to Colorado Springs. You step out and you have 58,000 acres of this pristine, beautiful chapel against the mountains. It was beautiful. I mean, it was just one of those places, and you're kind of having to work through to be an athlete, to be a leader, to get into the Air Force Academy. Was at the time was called the whole man concept. We kind of bastardized that to the manhole concept, but it was how you could, you know, be this best person that you could be because you had to compete for an appointment to the academy.
Okay.
So the Air Force Academy, to me, my brother got in first, so he was the lead in the pack. He got in, and I remember when you graduate from high school, the recruiter came and said, you know, you probably haven't seen Carl Dittmer around very much because he's been working hard on this stuff, and I know you've seen a couple of some of these 2,000-foot scholars, you know, $2,000 scholarship, and you know this one, his scholarship is equivalent of a $71,000 full rides 4-year scholarship. And you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And their draws are dropping, so I'm waiting for my graduation that the recruiter's gonna come and say the same thing, but he didn't. But the bottom line is you go to the academy and they pay you. And you know the restrictions are you can't be over 27, you can't be married, you can't lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate amongst you anyone who does. You can get kicked out for missing a class. I mean, so it's not you're getting an education and they're paying you, but it's a lot of I'll just say pain. So I mean, it's there to test you, but it's also building you into an Air Force officer. So having some flying experience, you're kind of just looking at as a all you think about as a freshman is you're getting yelled at. You're getting yelled at because you got to memorize all of every fighter in the U.S. inventory. You have to memorize, you know, Duhay's quote and all the, you know, the discipline was makes a free nation. You know, soldiers of a free nation are reliable in battle. You had to do all this stuff, and while they're yelling at you in your, you know, skivvies. But I have one of these upperclassmen that says, "Look, I first of all, they couldn't hit you. And so I was extremely happy because I've been beat up by my brother all of my life. And here he just yelled at me and beat me up. Now they can't beat me up. But this guy goes, look, if you were in F4 and you got a backseater and you're on fire, here's all the emergency procedure steps that you have to have memorized. You think it's going to be more stressful than what I'm doing right now? And you kind of look at the guy and you go, no, you're probably right. It is more stressful. He says, this is easy. And he goes, just learn how to think, how to memorize and repeat things from rote memory when you're under stress, because that's what's going to take. That's what it takes. That's what you have to look for. So when you have that mindset, that's your first year and you're just trying to get through it. And my brother said, look, and he was a jerk to me because he would leave notes in my box and he was thinking about quitting, but he got through his, you know, his freshman year and he said, look, do good, do really well. Do well on academics and do well with the military order of merit, and you'll get on the superintendent's list, and you will get into the soaring program. And I said, oh, okay, you know, what's the soaring program? Don't worry about it. Just do well. So I worked hard and I did well, and sure enough, I got in the soaring program. And what that meant was they had these sailplanes that the cadets, the instructor pilots were cadets. And so you come in as an underclassman and you learn how, on your summer in a 3-week period, you end up with a private pilot's license and gliding in a glider. So the tow pilots are all Vietnam vets flying these super Cubs because they had to be supercharged. But they would launch, and you were essentially learning how to fly against a Piper Cub because you were flying behind it like you were gunning it. You're being towed by a rope, but you're learning all of the things that you need to do to go into combat. But here I am as a first time I fly. The instructor goes, "Damn, you're a natural," and I go, "Well, yeah, it's just something that comes naturally to me." So anyway, so bottom line is, I got in the soaring program. I got my pilot's license for soaring. Then it became an instructor. So I flew 600 sorties in my 4 years at the academy, flying with students and taking cadets. I mean, it was just what could possibly be better is you're getting your education and you're flying.
Yeah.
Now, they also force you to do T-41s, which is a Cessna 172. And this was to make sure that you could fly a powered airplane. There was a very select few that got to do the gliders and be instructors. A lot of guys, every cadet got in a orientation ride to see what gliders were like, but only a few got selected for the program. So I got a good deal. So it was one of those, okay, thanks, bro. So did well by me. But anyway, but the T-41, now you're flying with instructors that are, they're not cadets. So they're actually academy academic instructors. And I happened to have one that was a fighter pilot. So this guy was going, the hardest thing about flying is getting the radio calls and all the other dumb shit stuff, pardon my French, that the Air Force forces you to do. He says, but that's just a penalty you have to pay. It's not a big deal. I said, okay, got it. So anyway, so I'm flying with him and he's going, your steep turns, you keep dropping like 200 feet. So he flies over top of a plateau where we're pretty high in altitude, 7,000 to 8,000 feet, but we're 200 feet over top of this plateau. And he goes, now do your steep turn. Well, you fall 200 feet and you crashed. No, I'm climbing on this thing. He goes, no, I don't. I want you to stay level. Look out the window. And that's what you eventually learn about flying is looking out the window is your best horizon. It's the best, best reference for seeing whether you're descending or rather than trying to look in at the instruments. And that really was, it was painful because all the radio calls and all the procedures, but that is exactly what you had to do when you got to pilot training. So when I graduated, you went to pilot training. Your first airplane is a T-37. So it's a twin engine jet Cessna. So Cessna, and they called it the Tweet because it was the most productive that you could ever have of a system that took jet fuel and turned it into squealing noise. So it was just this noisy. So you had to wear headsets and around them. They were just nasty airplanes. But anyway, so I'm doing really well in the class, and I ended up getting my instrument check early, which was good because I was at Vance Air Force Base in Enid, Oklahoma, and it got to be wintertime, and there's ice, and the T-38s, which is your next airplane, can't fly in the ice. So they would send one airplane up to go fly in the ice and see if it was, if it was clear enough for the T-38s to fly it. And I happened to be the only student with the instrument check done. So I've gotten all these extra sorties until one day we went to move and the ice on the wheels actually, I'm trying to move the airplane. When it finally moved, the tread rolled off of the tires and the instructor goes, okay, we're not flying. Let's go in. And the instructors for our class finally said, all right, it's been icy, it's been snowy. You guys are going to be the dealers for Monte Carlo night, and you're going to learn how to play. For us, it was craps, and so we taught. So it changed from a really difficult, horrible experience to they finally became our buds. But after they finally got us through the instrument checks, then the next thing you got into was the T-38. So you graduated it was probably about 6 months of T-37, and then you were into the T-38 for the last 6 months. And the T-38 was supersonic, twin engines. The engines weren't very, I won't say, they weren't rugged because they were actually from cruise missile engines. So they were only supposed to fly one time. A cruise missile goes in and blows up, no engine, who cares? But now you put them into this delicate airplane. But it was, man, it was like being in a race car. So everything you did, you were working towards getting the instructor pilot out of the back seat. And the T-37, you were working to get them out of the right seat. But even flying, you're on the sideways. That's a crew concept airplane. When you turn one direction, you're below the horizon. When you turn the other, you're above the horizon. In a T-38, you're on the horizon all the time because you're in the middle. And so it's a tandem airplane is just so much nicer than a side by side. And you're flying the first flight, you're doing afterburner climb and going supersonic. You're going, oh, dude, I got to do this. Really stubby wings, very. So you had to fly it all the way around, and so it was a dream. So that was the T-38, and when I now you're competing against your classmates the whole time.
Okay.
So the T-37, a lot of guys were really good from being light aircraft. Once they got in the T-38, it was a make or break. Because in the final turn with the stubby wings, you didn't have a lot of lift, so you're working right on the stall as you're coming around. I love that airplane. And in formation, you're rock solid. So the key pieces that they're trying to teach you is, hey, can you fly with another airplane? Can you judge closure and not hit them and then stop and, get in your formation? So your rejoins and all that stuff. And those were things you had to have depth perception. You had to be also aggressive without being stupid. And then they're flying me with the squadron commander was a lieutenant colonel fighter pilot. Hey, let me fly. Hey, sir, I'm the one getting the training, but we would do tactical formation. He loved. I mean, he's going, oh, come on, please let me fly. Hey, sir, I'm the student. He goes, okay, all right. So anyway, but you could tell he just loved flying, and so the fighter pilots that I flew with, it was just one of those things. My dad told me, he says, son, when you're going to the academy, tell them you want to be a fighter pilot. I said, well, what is that? Because someone who flies fighters, but just realize people will hate you because you say that. They're just. But now I'm starting to see it. The T-38 truly was wonderful. I mean, it was just. I mean, it was like okay. And so when we got our assignments down, you got to pick. Well, I was the number 2. So you put in what you wanted to do, and the top guy wanted to be an instructor in the T-38, so he was going to stay. And so now I'm the top one in the class. So I wanted an F-15, and at the time the F-15 was brand new. This was the first class that was going to get an F-15, one F-15, but not for Vance Air Force Base, but for Vance Air Force Base, William Air Force Base, Reese Air Force Base, Laughlin Air Force Base, Wichita Falls. So I'm competing like 10 of these UPT bases and one F-15, and I didn't get it. So because I didn't get what I wanted, they looked at everybody else had put F4 first, and they got their F4s that were fighter qualified, and I got a T-33. And T-33, it's actually, I'm sitting there going, my dad goes, what'd you get? You get an F-15? I go, no, sir. Did you get an F4? No, sir. What'd you get? And he goes, I got a T-33. He goes, oh, son, I flew those before you were born. And that was his lead into the jet. So coming out of a P-51, where if you put the throttle up, it would torque roll and you could kill yourself. You had to take off and modulate the power on it. You call in a T-33, and there's a throttle, and you have to keep the exhaust gas temperature is all you care about because it could overheat. So you're walking the throttle up, and there's the thrust in idle was the same as an F-16. Oops, I was trying to do an up. Anyway, the thrust in idle was the same as an F. The mill power for it, the highest thrust was like an F-16 idle. So and I'm looking at this. So the guy that was running my class, my instructor, he goes, look, if you want an F4, we'll get you one. But call the guy at the T-33 squadron because it's a lead into the F-106. So I called this and it was a major firm. And I call him up and I say, hey, sir, Lieutenant Dittmer, I'm just, they were telling me to call you because I got a T-33 and they were offering me an F-4. And he goes, son, you come here and you're going to fly twice a day, every day. You're going to fly your ass off and you're going to go in the best fighter in the inventory. So come down here. And it was Tyndall Air Force Base. I said, okay, got it. So here we are. And it's no kidding. There's 30 lieutenants. And no squadron just has lieutenants. This one does. And they all come into the T-33s. And our missions were to fly and do intercepts against each other. We were training ground-controlled intercept officers on their radar scopes, so they would just do intercepts and intercepts. So we learned, you worked your eyeballs out, because I was 2010 vision. I could see the T-33 at 14 miles until they turned on, nose on, and then I couldn't see them again until 6 miles. But you knew exactly where they were, and you're following the directions of the GCI controller. So it was all innate. But what our boss was a lieutenant colonel, Buffalo Rome. So Richard R. Rome, call sign Buffalo. So Buffalo had been in Vietnam, and he had been watching the T-28 that landed. And this guy got a Medal of Honor because one of their guys crashed. He landed on the runway, grabbed the guy, put him in the back of his airplane, single-seat airplane, stuffed him in there, took off. And this guy, Buffalo Rome, was going, boy, he's crazy, but he was strafing all of the Viet Cong that were trying to race in and stop him from taking off. So he watched the guy get a Medal of Honor. And his mantra to us is, even though we're just doing trainers, we're going into fighters. And you need to be a fighter pilot. And this was really their chance to look at who was really going to be fighter pilots, because some of the lieutenants, the 36 lieutenants, they didn't go on to fighters, but you got selected and you did that. That was it. So bottom line is I did T-33s for 2 years. It's unheard of, but I averaged 60 hours a month. And that was like unbelievable flying. You're flying twice a day, every day, just like he said, and then took across country 1 weekend every month. Now, the wife's not too happy about that stuff, but it was like, dude, this is lieutenants in heaven. So anyway, bottom line is, and then I got selected for the F-106. And that was also at Tyndall Air Force Base for the training. So we got to watch the F-106s all the time. We were their targets when they were doing their intercepts. We learned everything about them. But so the first time I got in an F-106, they told me, hey, you got an F-106. I'm in Phoenix, and I'm with another T-33 pilot. And there's a 106 that's a B model that's going back to Tyndall. He says, hey, I heard you just got an F-106. I go, yes, sir. And he goes, want to ride with me? I'm going to Florida. So I got my first ride in the back seat of an F-106 B model, and it was unbelievable. 1,895 miles unrefueled, but he's coming in to land, and he's going, does this place have 3 runways? I go, yeah, good. Because it comes in at such a high angle, you can't see what's in front of you. So it has 3 runways. He's got 2 on either side. He's hoping there's one underneath him. But that was just one of those, you're kidding me. No, this is the way it is. But anyway, so I got to go into the 106. And when you're learning to fly, it's called a B course, basic course. So it takes about 6 months. And you fly all of first of all, you take the airplane, you max perform it, see how well it does in the high alpha, where you're having, close to stall, that kind of stuff. And then you eventually learn the radar, and then you learn the tactics, working together as a lead trail to go after an adversary. And as an F-106, you're defending the homeland. So we were Air Defense Command. And so typically, my assignment was going up to K.I. Sawyer, Michigan, Upper Peninsula. And I went there for 4 years. And while I was there, you basically had to pull alert twice a week, where you go in to work in the morning, you go on alert, and then you'd come off the next day, and then you'd fly. So I was gone a lot. And then 1 week every month, you'd go on alert at your deck, which would be down in the south. So we initially were at Tyndall, And we had a place where you had 2 airplanes on alert. You had a third was a spare, but you had 2 airplanes on alert, and you had 3 pilots. And so one pilot would have a day off, and then you have 2 days on alert. Then you had a day off, so you just kind of flopped in and out of this thing. So the alert was kind of disappointing until we moved to Charleston, and then there were Bear bombers. Russian bombers would go along the coast, and they would tip their nose in on the air defense identification zone, make the fighters scramble. Then they'd turn out and see how much you run you out of gas. They'd turn back in, so you got to see bears and actually go and scramble on adversary airplanes. And they would go from over Iceland and then go down to Cuba and land. And then when they come back, they do the same thing and harass all of us. But we got to fly. You had to take off from a sound sleep to airborne in 5 minutes. So imagine that kind of the heart rate that you got to go. So you had your boots, you had everything lined up. So you'd jump out, pull on your flight suit, jump on your boots, race down, and then the crew chief has already taken everything off the airplane for the launch. He'd help. Do you need help strapping? No, I'll strap. Pull in the straps, put your helmet on, and you're starting the airplane. And your heart's racing, but you only had about 85 seconds from the time the engine started till you were launching, and then you're on battle stations and gone. So the scrambles were awesome. I mean, it was just something that, dude, this is ew. So that was the 106. I did that for 4 years, which got me into the interceptor weapons school. While I was there, they took your best instructors and they sent them down to the weapons school. And the weapons school is like a PhD for that airplane. So you learn everything about the radar, you learn everything about all the different weapons, you employ all of them. And so as a young captain in the 106, I had gone down to, used to have, now you'll find this hard to believe, but for air defense, we carried a nuclear-tipped Genie rocket that was designed to knock out Russian bomber formations. So the reason you had all the bases on the northern tier, like Minot, North Dakota, Griffiths, New York, K.I. Sawyer, was because that was the shortest route for them to come bomb the U.S., Chicago, and hitting so that's how everything was lined up. And so these rockets, this is in the doors on they actually had internal weapons like the F-22, the F-35. The 106 had internal weapons so it could do Mach 2 on takeoff. So there was nothing hanging out to slow it down. But the doors would open and this nuclear rocket would pop down and it would pull a lanyard, and your airplane had to be perfectly steered because it was going to be an arrow going about 8 miles in front of you and blowing up. And so when it came out and it passed, when it passed your nose, first time you saw it, it was doing Mach 3. So it was just this explosive, whoa! And then they had a 50-pound phosphorus charge that would mark it where the nuke had just gone up. It'd go boop. And if you were looking at it, you were blind. You were supposed to turn and pull 5.5 Gs and be heading the other direction so the nuclear blast pushed you out of the fight. But it was the only air-to-air missile that had a PK of 1. So it was a probability of kill of 1. There's no other weapon that had that because they figured some of them would get 2 or 3 bombers. So anyway, so that was the 106. All right. That was so my first fighter, my first love. I had 1,069 hours in that airplane, and I'm a weapons instructor. And then it was obsolete. So they were shutting down our base. They were shutting down the airplane. And we got promised that we were going to get fighters. And so the first couple of guys got air liaison officers who were going to do non-flying jobs. And so we got some help from the Secretary of the Air Force. Hey, these guys they stayed open a little bit longer for this town. You guys give them assignments. So I ended up getting an F-16, and the F-16 was to Kunsan in 1985. And Kunsan F-16 was an A model. That was a Block 15. We flew Block 10s, Block 15s. And then so I ended up going to school in the middle of February. We left K.I. Sawyer in a snowstorm, and we got to Luke Air Force Base. And no kidding, there was snow on the saguaro cactus and snow on the welcome sign for Phoenix, Arizona. But the next day we were swimming in the swimming pool because that water was a lot warmer than Lake Superior. And it was like, wow, what a great place. So got in the F-16. It was fantastic, unbelievable. But I had never dropped a bomb before. And everybody else had been doing bombing and strafing and all sorts of stuff. We did air-to-air missiles and air-to-air gun. And I was qualified on all that stuff. But everybody in my class had done bombs, so they said the instructor goes, we're just gonna, just go ahead and skip the bomb academics. And I go, excuse me, what's this BDU 33 thing? And they said, oh, conehead, and they call us coneheads because we had our radar was our big threat. And so anyway, one of the guys goes, he was my classmate was a weapons instructor in the F4. So he knew everything about all the bombs and all the weapons. He goes, I'll teach you. So anyway, I went through and ended up getting Top Gun for a low angle bomb. I won't even tell the story of how that all happened. But then I go over to Kunsan, and now I have basically 30, 40 hours of F-16 time, 1,000 hours of 106 time, 1,200 hours of T-33 time. So I got a lot of hours. But I'm a wingman, so that's just how you show up. And so when you're flying and fighting in the F-16, everything is done as a pair, and then that pair belongs to a 4-ship, and that 4-ship belongs to a squadron. And so you'll have four, typically about 12 fighters in a group, and then you'll have Eagles to protect you. And the 106s we used to protect the F-16s. The interesting thing was, everybody was ignoring us to go after the F-16s. Why? Because they carry the bombs that are going to hit their base.
Yeah.
So here I am we're going into these mass exercises, and you'd be flying, you're going, gosh, here comes another bandit. And so you got more kills because they were all coming to you to try to stop the bombers. After 1 year of remote in Korea, I went back to Luke and taught. And I taught for 3 years, and then I was about to get out of the Air Force. It was a long story, but I had 800 hours of F-16 time, and they said, hey, gosh, we're opening up a squadron in Netherlands. And I said, Netherlands? And the guy that's going through it, I'm teaching him how to fly the F-16. He's going, gosh. And I was a hunter, and he's a hunter. He's talking, oh, man, we'd love to have you. This is going to be great. And he comes back the next day and he says, you're not going to get the job. And I said, oh, why? He says, well, apparently the colonel's wives on this base don't like your wife. My wife she does takes everything on as a debate. So anyway, bottom line is I put my papers in to leave, and the new wing commander invited me and my wife in. He said, and his wife was there, and he says, hey, I've been looking at your record. You've got a really good record. Don't get out because of this one incident. I would never have let that happen. And I said, well, all right, sir. But I would like to, get an F-16 to Kunsan or, to Germany has been my first choice, and I never get what I want. And he goes, well, I know a guy over there. And I said, that's a problem. That's the point. You always have to know somebody to get the jobs instead of just doing good work. No, you're doing a great job. Don't get out. So I'm going, oh gosh, okay. So I stayed in and I pulled my papers. I just made major. So they had to take my red line and take it away because I went ahead and got promoted. And so I finally called the assignments guys and I go, hey, I don't know if you've heard the pathological lawyer from Saturday Night Live. This is I have a Major Bovenizer. I'd like to speak to Major Bovenizer. Oh, may I ask what it's about? Well, yeah, I need him to give Major Dittmer an F-16 to Germany. He goes, oh, may I ask who's asking? Yeah, it's General Creech. Yeah, that's the ticket. And he's laughing. He's going, all right, Major Dittmer, I'll pass the message on. And he hangs up, calls me like 5 minutes later. How about an F-16 to Spangdahlem, Germany? I go, well, yeah, but let me talk to my wife, but yes. And why or how? And he said, they had a guy going through their weapons school and he busted out. And they needed a weapons officer. And I had just done the weapons school in the 106, but I got reblued. So they sent me to Germany. That's when I got to go to the war. So when I got to Germany, my brother was my sponsor. So here's Lips, and I became two Lips
Uh-huh.
because, but he was already flying F-16s there. So I'm flying F-16s in another squadron, and the Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. So my boss was the chief of weapons. I was weapons for the F-16. There was a weapons officer for the F-4. So we're all sitting there going, how the hell are we getting the war? When Saddam Hussein invaded, everything went to Saudi Arabia, to Oman, and down at Bahrain. So they were putting all the stuff, and it was Tactical Air Command. So everything from the United States was based there. And we're going, but wait a minute, Turkey is a NATO ally. We're in Europe, we're in NATO, we're their allies. So we worked up a plan, no kidding, back on napkins, that we could come in and actually get all the way to Baghdad because all those defenses were to the south. They had nothing from the north. We could come in from the north and have a back door to Baghdad that would disrupt their ability to defend themselves. And so we briefed this up, and no kidding, take this, and we're going up to the, ended up with a 4-star general going, all right, you go to Turkey. So I go to Turkey to start writing the O plans or war plans for how we're going to do these attacks. And the Turks have said, look, they're going to be our neighbor 5,000 years from now. But if you go to war, we'll let you go to war. So if as soon as the shooting starts, then we will give you permission to attack. So I'm there at Christmas and I'm working through all this stuff, and sure enough, on January 17th, boom, we got the go ahead to cross the border after they did the first attack. So anyway, I'm working on all the plans, but they wouldn't let any more airplanes into Turkey until the war started. So now finally the wild weasels, and wild weasels are important kind of, it's a whole nother story, but wild weasels are surface to air. We attack the surface to air missiles. So wild weasels go in first, stir up the SAMs to bring up their radars. We shoot anti-radiation missiles at their radars and knock them down so the bombers come in and drop their bomb. Works pretty good. So anyway, so I'm there writing these war plans, and now there's a squadron coming I've never flown with, but it's my brother's squadron. So he's there, and they show up, and they're going to let me fly eventually. But anyway, I'm going to be flying nights because I have to work nights. And so my first combat mission is on January the 21st. 17th was when the war started, and my first combat mission was, let's just say, wasn't great. So the way it happened is we knew where we were going to Mosul. We had B-52s were going to drop bombs, F-111s were going to drop bombs, and we had to go south of Mosul. And to get there at night, you're flying in air refueling in the weather. And I hadn't flown in a long time, but I didn't tell anybody. Probably out of currency. But anyway, so I'm doing all the air refueling, and everything's going like it's supposed to, except when we cross the border, you're hanging on the wing of an F-4 because he has a guy in the back seat, the electronic warfare officer, that has the electronic order of battle on the size of a dinner plate. And the nose gunner is just, he's the taxi driver to get this guy close enough where he can shoot the missiles at these radars. And so you had to be hanging with him because we didn't know where the radars were. And he was going to tell me a heading and a type of radar, and then I was going to shoot. And my brother said, whatever you do, don't look at the harm. It's really bright. You'll get night blindness. Oh, okay, got it. Here, have a gun, all this stuff. And I'm going, gosh, this is combat. I've done a lot of combat in Red Flag, but nobody ever dies. And the interesting thing is you all get better because you land and go, wow, that was a good tactic. Let's do that, and you try new things. But we went in to combat, and I crossed the border, and it's dark out. There's no lights on. There's nothing. And we go all the way down south of Mosul. I'm hanging with my F-4, and then we turn north because we're well south of Mosul. The bombers are coming in from the north, and they said, man, when the bombs go off, all hell breaks loose. And sure enough, the bombs hit. And what they were doing, the Iraqis weren't stupid. They wouldn't turn their radars on early because we'd shoot them. but they knew whoever dropped a bomb was within 5 miles. So they could bring their radar up and shoot them. So that was their time to get the kills. So here we are looking, waiting, and they're all waiting too. And as soon as the first bomb hits, AAA shoots, missiles are going off. My F4 goes, slap shot, roll in, 310 heading. I turn 310 heading, I select a roll in, I pickle the button, I close my eyes. I open one and look down at my knee board because it's got white paper. That's not so bright. I look up and then the missile fires. So I guess I had time, lost track of time. And so now I'm blind. And no kidding, the F4, I called, hey, two's blind. And it's nighttime, it's hard to see. And he's got all his lights off except the little green ones. And I look and I go, and he has shot a missile. And he's a few miles away. I point at him, I lock on, I say, buddy lock. And he doesn't answer. And I go, oh, I locked the wrong guy. I'm on the wrong F4. But he's happy because I've locked onto him. I didn't know that. I wish he had said something. But anyway, so I'm working my way out. And I'm now single ship in red flag. If you were by yourself, you were dead. And I'm by myself at night in a combat zone. There's no airplane flying. There's nobody going to shoot me down. But I finally getting close to the border. I'm going to make my first combat sortie. And I go, warning, fuel low. And I look down and I go, holy shit, I've got still like 4,800 pounds of gas. Oh, that's all in the wing tanks. And they stopped feeding when I tank inerted. I did the fence check and everything right, but I never looked at my gas. Otherwise, I would know they weren't feeding. And now they can't feed. And so I'm going, oh no, I'm about to lose an airplane. And so I snapshot, called AWACS, could you give me a snapshot to a tanker? And I'm seeing a rotating beacon off to the north of me as we're turning towards, we're kind of cutting the corner on Syria to head back to Incirlik. And he said, oh no, you got a tanker's it's a 270 for 280 miles. And I go, oh, that ain't gonna work. And our primary divert was the Yabrakir. It was 225 miles. No, that's not gonna work. I got about maybe. And the backseater that the F4G goes, stand by for coordinates of Batman. So he sends me the coordinates to Batman. I type it in. And by this time, I've gotten rid of my tanks. I got rid of so I'm climbing and I'm up at 45,000 feet. And I get to 45,000 feet and I type in Batman and it says I'm going to get there with zero fuel. I go, yes. Because if you got zero fuel at 40,000 feet, it means you're going to descend. You'll have enough fuel to land. So I stand by for frequency for Batman. So I call Batman. Batman, this is Gen 04, I'm emergency fuel. Joe, cannot land here. I said, no, I'm emergency fuel. I have to land here. Now, by this time, I'm looking down into a valley of mountains, and I'm seeing clouds that I'm not sure if they're fog or clouds, and there's black holes, and none of them are lit up. And I said, could you turn on your airfield lights? You cannot land here. So he turns on the lights. And I can see the trees light up. So I go, okay, it's not fog. And I'm descending in and I've got to find it. And I have no idea which way the runway is. I pop through the clouds and it's pretty low. In fact, it's really low. But fortunately, it had just rained. And off in the distance, the town of Batman, the lights are on. So the bottoms of the clouds are lit up. And I see the reflection of the runway in the water because it had just rained here. I put my gear down, the lights come on, the guy starts screaming, you cannot land here. I said, I have to land here. I have 250 pounds of fuel. I'm just about to flame out. I'm coming around the corner. And the rest of the story was he never said, you cannot land here. There's men and equipment on the runway. They're doing repairs. Well, those men and equipment are running like they're off the runway. They're moving vehicles. I come through and I land. Poof. And you must hold your position. I will hold my position. I'll do whatever you want. Go ahead. What do you need? And this guy drives up in a truck and he looks at me and he goes, the international signal for what the hell? And I said, I need fuel. He goes, follow me. And he's a follow me truck. So I'm following him. And as soon as I clear the runway, the engine goes and it's out of gas. So I turn off the EPU, hide all that stuff so it doesn't do emergencies. But my airplane stops, the lights go off. This guy's driving and he comes back. Like, well, what the? Yeah. give me my chocks. He chocks my airplane. And by the time I crawl out, the place is surrounded by Turks. And the Turks weren't in the war. But they were very interested because they were the closest base to Iraq. And so they didn't know if they were going to be attacked. And they were saying, I was very lucky I didn't get shot down because they had AAA and a bunch of other uh, hair triggered gunners. So, anyways, the bottom line is I get the General Toxoy says, Major Dittmer, what kind of missile is this? I said, well, that's an AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missile. Well, where's your other one? I said, sir, that's in a Roland right next to Mosul. He goes, slaps me on the back. He goes, come with me. And we go to his command post. He sits me down. He opens up the big board, pulls up the map, and I go, oh, gosh, you're way behind. And I show him all the radars that we've killed. And then he goes, what can I do for you? And he's giving me tea and some donuts. I said, I need fuel. Oh, your airplane is fully fueled. I need a flight plan. Oh, you have a flight plan. I need a ride to my airplane. He says, come with me. Puts me in the car, take off. I'm no kidding. Catch the airplanes that were landing as I got to the airfield. So they were still landing when I came in. And they said, is your airplane broken? I said, no, it's code one. I got rid of the fuel. The tanks weren't feeding. Oh, it's fixed because those are gone. So anyway, so that's my first war story and the hardest one ever. But anyway, so sorry about running you over your time.
This is perfect. That's perfect. I mean, what a great journey, and what a intense kind of recount there at the end. Wow. I mean, that's a lot. I mean,
those called war stories, and they have to have 10% truth. Fighter pilots, that's kind of the way we work. So you can embellish, but you got to have at least some truth. But yeah, no, it was actually, I sent him a case of booze. I went over, the guys that would actually go to Batman were our special forces. And if we ever punched out, they would go in and rescue us. So they would fly into the Batman with the night vision goggles on a C-130. So I gave him a case of booze and I sent a note to General Toxway. Thank the controllers. Please share this with your guys. They saved my airplane, quite possibly saved my life. And 3 nights later, knocking on the door, I open it up. It's one of the spooks. He's got beard. And, hey, are you Major Dittmer? I said, yes, sir. He goes, I'm not a sir. I'm a sergeant. And he goes, got a birthday present for you. And it is a birthday present from General Toxway. And I open it up. It's 4 bottles of wine, but the thing is, General Toxway says, in Turkey, we say when a man's life has been saved, he is reborn. And your new birthday is now 21 January. So,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, and my brother and I drank the worst wine I've ever had, but man, it was worth it. So anyway, that's being a fighter.
That's you're reborn that day.
Oh yeah. Would I do it over? Everything we've done, from all the assignments, yeah, I do it every bit of it. I do it over again. I mean, I'm so jealous of the guys going into the F-35 and F-22 now. It's just a whole, yeah. Once you're in it, you're there for it's a life.
Yeah. Well, what advice would you give to aspiring fighter pilots who might be listening to this podcast?
Yeah. So if you want to be a fighter pilot, it's kind of changed. The meritocracy piece is huge. When I was there, you were fighting all the time to be number one. So they're kind of going, this is not as important. And you're going, well, you actually have an advantage if you had flying times. So they want to take that advantage away from you, so that they can then judge, equally from the pool of foes. And you're going, okay, good luck with that, because the flying that my dad did was spins and a bunch of other stuff that that just you won't get in the school. So, but it's desire, but it's a mindset. To fly airplanes, it's great, it's wonderful, but if you're flying an airplane, you want to get that other person out. You're a fighter pilot. I don't want to say, hey, is the gear clear? Oh yes, go ahead and raise it. Okay, I'm raising the gear. Yeah, you're raising the gear. You don't say anything. You don't even, most of the airplanes, you don't even run the intercom. So it's just silent. And you can go back to, the high flight poem, but I've reached out and touched the face of God. I've been up to 68,000 feet because I could, but boy, I was still supersonic at 140 knots, and I'm going, man, that's my stall speed, and it's supersonic. Oh, but wow. I mean, anyway, there's things that you see, but one of the things I used to teach the young kids when they're coming into the F-16, oh wow, this is the F-16, it's wonderful. But being a fighter pilot means you're going to take the fight to the enemy. There are no points for second place. Your family gets a flag in a triangle, and you're got a spot in Arlington. So you're not playing for, oh gosh, I don't get a trophy for participating. If you're participating in the war and you want to support it, there's lots of missions. Flying a C-17 in and delivering stuff, flying a tanker and giving gas. But if you're going to go fight in a war, there was an F-117 pilot that dropped, and I tell the kids this, that he dropped a bomb, and it was a hard and deeply buried target, and it was this. They knew it was a command post, but the families of the generals and the officers had been put in this thing, and so he killed a couple of hundred civilians with a single bomb. And you're going, that wasn't the hardest sortie. The hardest sortie is he had to fly the next night and go after another target. And that's a mindset that you got to understand, and that's part of what you're building a warrior, and all the training you do has to be focused on that. And there never was a chance. I watched some kid was leaving the F-22 because everybody picked on him, and they're always not, can never do anything right. Dude, if they didn't talk to you, if they didn't give you feedback, if they didn't try to make you better, then that's when I would be worried. Because we always, I mean, the longest debriefs, 2 or 3 hours. Even if you did something good, if you had a colonel, when I was a colonel, if I flew with somebody and they didn't debrief me on something because they, oh, you're a colonel. No, you got to tell me what I did wrong, because I've got to get better so I can go to war and survive. And to be effective, what I told my kids, and I have 2 boys, that I want to go to the war. I went to Desert Fox, and I was a squadron commander, and I took a squadron. I took all my pilots to do Southern Watch, and they're going, God, don't do that. I said, dude, everywhere I go, something happens. I was in Germany for the fall of the wall. I did, Desert Storm. I did all of these things. Everywhere I go, something happens. And when 3 days after we got there, we went to war, and we dropped laser guided bombs at night, hitting these targets in Iraq because they kicked out the UN inspectors. But that was like, dude, I told them, look, if I turn and run, you can turn and run. If I'm going, you're going. So just follow me. And I took them in and flew the first mission in. We dropped our bombs, everything. The guys come back and they go, sir, it was just like you said. I go, yeah, check your fuel. Because I didn't that one time, but it's like harder than you'll ever be in combat, because your adversary doesn't come back from the right. They don't get better because you don't debrief them. And most of the adversaries that we're against, China, they don't debrief. There's that saving face, oh, I'm still alive. I'm brief with Koreans that, you didn't shoot me down. I said, well, my pepper's on your head, but yeah, I didn't pull the trigger. But if I'm gunning you, someone else could gun you. No, I'm not dead. And you go, oh, okay. There's a mindset that has to be in getting better. And it's just, there is no points for second place. So
you have to embody that.
Yes.
You have to be willing to accept that criticism, because it improves your proficiency. And if you're not proficient, it could mean the loss of your life.
Right. And dude, tell me what the standards are, and I'm not going to only meet the standards, I'm going to do better. And so you're always just constantly striving to get better. And the guys that don't do that, they shouldn't be in fighters. And so I told them that brief every new class coming into Luke, and I say, hey, go ahead. It's $7-8 million to go through the class, so per pilot. So you want them to go, look, I want to do something else. Okay, do it before we spend that amount of money. The money now is probably more than that. And again, we were paying $5,000 an hour for F-16 time. And now it's probably close to $16,000 an hour because you got all the breakage and parts that have to be replaced and that type of stuff. So it's expensive, but you're training the whole time. It's never the same. Every sortie was different. When you're fighting somebody and they told you, never go up. All right, I'll go up. And if you can't beat me, then maybe it's not a bad thing for me to go up. Well, how did you do that? Dude, don't be, sit there and just say, hey, I give me something to work with. So anyway, it's so dynamic, even with the bombs, just weather and winds and all sorts of stuff. But gosh, like I said, I've enjoyed I would not trade any of it for what we've done. So it was neat. So thank you for paying taxes. I really, really appreciate it. And the guys that are flying F-22s and the gals, they appreciate it too, because they get to keep doing it.
Kurt, a great story, a great hearing your stories. I just want to say, thank you for sharing your knowledge and time today.
Good.
We really appreciate it.
It's nice meeting you, and I look forward to actually seeing you in person sometime. I'll watch some of your podcasts.
That wraps up our conversation with Kurt. We talked about how U.S. fighter jets were scrambled during the Cold War, World War II bomber pilots, and the importance of implementing feedback prior to fighting an adversary. Go to this episode's show notes to see any resources Kurt mentioned during our episode. And lastly, subscribe to the Simple Questions podcast to get notified when our latest episodes are released. Thank you for listening, and remember to keep asking questions.